You know, there are some phrases that are so ingrained in our culture, we just assume we know what they mean. But what if I told you that one of the most famous quotes about how to study scripture is actually a drunken insult? Well, today we're cracking open a biblical detective story. And here it is, Isaiah 28:10. We've all heard this one, right? For centuries, this verse has been held up as the gold standard for how to learn, carefully, methodically, building your knowledge piece by piece, line by line. It sounds so wise, so orderly, so divine. But is that what's really going on here? Because when you actually dig into the context of the chapter, a totally different picture explodes onto the scene. We're not in a quiet study hall here. We're at a chaotic, booze-soaked banquet. And this famous phrase, it might not be a principle for learning truth at all, but the slurred, sarcastic taunt of leaders who are actively rejecting it. So, which one is it? To figure this out, we have to basically become crime scene investigators. So let's head back to the 8th century BCE. The prophet Isaiah walks in on a scene, and it is just bizarre. Okay, so picture this. The scene Isaiah lays out is absolute chaos. The nation's spiritual leaders, the priests and the prophets, are completely wasted. They're stumbling around, reeling from wine and beer, and there's literally vomit on all the tables. And in the middle of all this debauchery, they're sneering at Isaiah's message, boasting about some covenant with death, and chanting that weird repetitive phrase, precept upon precept. This isn't a holy gathering. It's a political party that has gone way, way off the rails. Right, so you gotta ask yourself, this level of desperation and just decadence, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. Something serious has to be going on behind the scenes. What kind of political crisis could push the leaders of an entire nation to get blackout drunk and start talking about making deals with death itself? Well, the motive, it turns out, was pure and simple terror. The nation of Judah was staring down the barrel of the most powerful and absolutely brutal empire on the planet. To really get the sense of panic, just look at the timeline. In the late 8th century BCE, Assyria was the superpower, no question. By 722, they'd already steamrolled Judah's northern neighbor, Israel. And now, around 701 BCE, that same unstoppable army is parked right on Judah's border, ready to pour in like a flood. The situation is absolutely critical. So, with their backs against the wall, what do Judah's leaders do? They panic. They totally ignore the prophet Isaiah, who's telling them to trust in God for protection. Instead, they go behind his back and make a secret deal with the only other superpower who might stand a chance against Assyria, Egypt. And this is where our detective story gets really, really interesting. Because Isaiah doesn't just call their secret treaty a bad idea, he actually quotes the leaders themselves, and they give their deal a very strange, very specific name. This, my friends, is our smoking gun. According to Isaiah, the leaders are literally boasting, we have made a covenant with Mut. Now in Hebrew, the word Mut, that's M-W-T, means death. That's the word they're using to describe their big political alliance. And for centuries, this just stumped scholars. I mean, why on earth would you call your big strategic alliance with Egypt a covenant with death? Was Isaiah just being poetic, using a metaphor? Or was there something else going on? Well, it turns out the answer was hidden in a brilliant bilingual pun. And here it is. This is the key that unlocks the whole mystery. In Hebrew, Mut means death. But in Egyptian, the word Mut, which sounds almost identical, is the name of a very powerful goddess, Mut. She was the queen mother of the gods, and, get this, a divine guarantor of royal treaties. They weren't making a covenant with death. They were making a covenant with the goddess Mut. And once you have this key, the entire chaotic scene from Isaiah 28 just snaps into focus. Every single bizarre detail, that heavy drinking, the vomiting, the mockery, it all points directly to the worship of this specific Egyptian deity. The case cracks wide open. So who exactly was this Mut? Well, she was a huge deal. She was a major national goddess for the very Egyptian and Nubian dynasties that Judah was trying to partner with. She was seen as this ferocious protector of the king, and crucially, she was the divine power who guaranteed international treaties. If you swore a treaty in her name and broke it, you'd have to face her wrath. She was the perfect deity to call on for a military alliance. Mut was also this powerful mother figure known as the divine wet nurse. You can actually see it in this amulet from the period. It shows a queen suckling at Mut's breast, seeking her divine protection. And this is the key to Isaiah's mockery. When he asks, "To whom will he teach knowledge? To those just weaned from milk?" He's throwing their own imagery right back in their faces. He's accusing them of acting like helpless babies running to a foreign mommy goddess instead of trusting God. Now, think back to that crazy scene Isaiah described. The drunkenness, the vomiting, it all lines up perfectly. Egyptian sources tell us that the worship of Mut involved ritual intoxication at big events like the Festival of Drunkenness. Vomiting was apparently a pretty common side effect, so much so that it's even depicted in their art. Even the fading flowers Isaiah mentions were a part of her cult. The scene he's describing isn't just random partying, it's a religious ceremony to seal the deal with the goddess Mut. And let's be clear, we're not talking about some gentle, peaceful goddess here. Mut's identity was often fused with the absolutely terrifying lion-headed goddess Sekhmet, the avenging eye of Re. She was a warrior, a destroyer of Egypt's enemies. This is why Judah's leaders ran to her. They were looking for the protection of a powerful, scary goddess to save them from a powerful, scary empire. Okay, so now we have the full context. A secret political treaty with Egypt, ratified by a drunken religious ceremony for the warrior goddess Mut. And right into the middle of this party, Isaiah shows up. And this finally brings us back to that famous phrase. See, from the leader's perspective, Isaiah's message, forget Egypt, trust God, follow his simple commands, it sounded simplistic. It sounded naive. Frankly, to these sophisticated political operators, it sounded like baby talk. And so, they decided to mock him. So let's break down their taunt. First, they're drunk, so their speech is already slurred and repetitive. Second, they're mocking what they see as Isaiah's simple message by turning it into childish babble. Salatza, salatza, kalaka, kalaka. That's what precept on precept, line on line sounds like in Hebrew. And third, some scholars even suggest the sounds might be a drunken imitation of the foreign Egyptian chants they just heard in the ritual for Mut. It's a multi-layered insult, fueled by arrogance and a whole lot of alcohol. So, after laying out all the evidence, the political crisis, the bilingual pun, the specific details of the Egyptian ritual, the verdict becomes crystal clear. So here's the final verdict. That phrase we've all used to champion careful, methodical study is, in its original context, the polar opposite. It was never a divine formula for learning. It was the slurred, sarcastic mockery of corrupt leaders who were rejecting profound truth in favor of drunken, childish babble. Using it as a blueprint for study completely inverts its original, dire warning. And this just reveals the devastating genius of Isaiah's message. His wordplay was perfectly, tragically accurate. By making a covenant with the goddess Mut, the leaders of Judah were, in fact, making a covenant with MWT, with death itself. Their clever political scheme was a spiritual dead end, and it would lead directly to their ruin. The pun wasn't just a clever line, it was a fatal prophecy. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a phrase this famous, this foundational, can be so completely misunderstood, what else are we missing? It proves that context isn't just some boring background information. Sometimes context is everything. It's literally the difference between a divine formula and a drunken taunt.